Section 1 of The Black Cat, Volume 6, Number 10, July 1901. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Patty Harden. The Black Cat, Volume 6, Number 10, July 1901. Section 1. An Understudy for a Princess, by Miriam Michelson. The pepper to the extreme right, a crescent of small oblong crackers curving in. Still on the right, half of a lemon. Farther toward the center of the table, a line of salt, with a knife laid at right angles. And dominating it all, the empty salt cellar, reversed. The waiter who served Arthur Jedrum in his London club noted the familiar arrangement with a look of hopeless patience. Jedrum had just gone out after sitting dreamily over his oysters till it got so late that the wary waiter thought he must have fallen asleep. In the morning it would be the same, the perplexed waiter told himself. In place of the crackers there would be a bay line of breadcrumbs, and a cube of sugar would mark the spot where the lemon had been the night before. And at dinner, whether he dined alone, as he usually did, or whether he brought with him a giant Boer whose imperfect speech was all of diamonds and greedy Uitlanders, or a hard-faced Antipodean who held forth in the dry fields of West Australia, or a turbaned, yellow-faced, full-lipped man with whom he conversed in French, or a fat-faced, prosperous-looking fellow who discussed Nevada mines and Texas cattle. Still, after he and his guest had left the table, in front of Jedrum's place, there would be an indenting bay of broken bent matches, a wine-glass standing for the high peak to the right, and the rest of the well-known topographical features carefully, streamingly smudged in cigar ashes on the smooth white cloth. Only once had this big young fellow with the burned blond face and the cosmopolitan lack of nationality in his loose figure and reticent tongue failed to leave the map behind him. This was when he came into the club with a brown-faced, black-mustached, liquid-eyed Hawaiian, and they talked in an odd, musical, vowelful language, straight through the courses of which neither partook, both leaving the table suddenly while the waiter was absent. Then Jedrum was not seen about the club for 3 days, at the end of which time he came back, and the waiter found a page from the timetable on the Scottish Highlands torn crescent-shaped and marked with blue pencil to the right, farther in again, straight across, and then again along the line. No one would have been more surprised than Jedrum himself had he known that his habit of thought was being disclosed by the automatic portrayal of his long, strong, nervous fingers. Yet the black man who had served him in Egypt and India, when he was surveying in advance of the railroad, the little French man-of-all-work whose invaluable services had ended in an asylum, after they too had been lost in the Arizonian desert, the clever Chinese boy he had picked up in New Zealand, all of these could recall perfectly that same crescent-shaped bay with the familiar landmarks. Black Ali, though, remembered it as having been constructed of uncut, unpolished diamonds. Pierre knew it best as a half-circle of glistening sand, with pieces of string and broken bits of cactus for the landmarks. It dwelt in Ah Sing's retentive memory, worked out in rich quartz crystals, with gold nuggets of various sizes to mark the positions from which the London waiter superciliously swept the lemon, the pepper caster, and the salt cellar. Ali made up his mind, after much ostentatious and official thinking, that the plan referred to a highly original and undoubtedly successful scheme for transportation, involving the use of a new and unknown motor. Pierre smiled knowingly every time he saw the giant Dane absorbed in the work of his fingers. Her room, Pierre said to himself, was marked by the bright bit of red string, her husband's by the cactus thorn. The crescent was a roundabout path her lover must take to get to her, when the time should come. Ah Sing had decided that it was a plan of the hiding-place of a great treasure. The cheerful little yellow man waited for years, patiently following Jedrum about the world, expecting confidently that the time and place would come when and where the crescent of powdered quartz and the gold nuggets would reproduce themselves on a gigantic scale, when and where Ah Sing should be regretfully compelled to kill his big young master while he slept, and take possession of the mine himself. But when Jedrum sailed from London for Hawaii, he left the indignant Ah Sing behind him, and when he arrived in San Francisco in the spring of '98, he had no servant with him. The princess knitted her delicate brows. She stood meditating, a card in her hand. The name was oddly familiar, but when or where she had heard it, she could not remember. Arthur Jedrum. Arthur Jedrum! How absurd! At the name, the memory of the islands she had not seen for years grew strong within her. By some strange trick of memory, that odd name seemed associated with the plash of a deep blue summer sea of Honolulu, with the scarlet hibiscus, with the pale perfumed yellow of the ginger flower, with the waving reflections of tall, graceful coconut palms in the still water, with the soft, moist warmth of Hawaii, with all that luxury of tropical island scenery that had surrounded Kaulani's childhood. "But, Kaulani, just how long are you going to stand there while the boil waits?" It was Lilia's voice that roused the princess from her reverie. Kaulani sighed. "Not a moment longer, Lilia. Father is waiting for me. I cannot see this gentleman. You'll see him, Lilia. I should remember his name, I know. Tell him. Tell him." "I'll tell him how sorry you'll be when you hear that he has called in your absence," laughed Lilia. "But truly, if I were Princess of Hawaii, I'd enjoy seeing everybody that called. We'll play princess, dear. Tell the stranger that you are Kaulani, Princess of Nowhere. He'll not know the difference, and you'll have the pleasure." "You might be Queen of Somewhere if you'd listen just once," answered Lilia, her voice trembling with eagerness. "I'm sure it could be done, Kaulani. Just say once to the Hawaiians, Lilia, you poor, nonsensical little Lilia, you're the most rabid royalist I ever met. Shall we fight the United States, dear, you and I? Shall we compel the world to see things as we see them? Shall we make ourselves the laughingstock of the world with another puny rebellion in the so-called Republic of Hawaii, and let our enemies triumph over us even more than they do now? Hush! There comes Mr. Jerdrum. I'll slip out this way." The princess turned to leave the room. She stopped with her hand upon the bedroom door. "I know now," she whispered hurriedly. "Jerdrum was half scientist, half civil engineer. He came to the islands in my uncle Kalaka's time. He was the only man little Kalani ever trusted fully. And this is his son, Arthur, my old playmate. Be nice to him, if it weren't for my engagement with my father. Shh!" The princess closed the door softly behind her, and Jerdrum entered from the hall. "I hardly hoped you would see me," he said, taking the hand Lilia held out. "Our friendship dates back so long ago that I didn't know you'd recognize my name instead of your old playmate." "So we were playmates?" asked Lilia, amused, yet seized by a sudden whim to hear more before she should enlighten this man with a sincere voice and odd blue eyes. Jerdrum took the chair she indicated. "Yes," he answered, "in Kalaka's time. You have changed very much since then." "How?" the girl asked curiously. "Surely, your highness—" Mechanically, Lilia made a disclaiming gesture. "Isn't it like old times?" Jerdrum asked with his peculiar short laugh. "When we quarreled, I used to call you your highness, and then you wouldn't speak to me." "But how have I changed?" The coquettish blood of generations of French grandmothers leaped to the cheek of this half-Hawaiian girl. All the women in her challenged comparison with the beautiful Princess Kaulani. Jerdrum drew a small card from his pocket and passed it to her. It was a photograph of a girl of 12, whose exceeding slenderness and inquiring large soft eyes reminded one of the ungainly immaturity of a young deer. Lilia looked long at the picture. She hardly saw the childish features of Kaulani. Mentally, she was putting in place of this youthful face the graceful, proud head of the princess as she had just seen it, and for the first time, with the consciousness of Kaulani's beauty, came an unhappy, miserable feeling of envy. "Do you remember the day you gave me this?" Jerdrum asked, amused at her long inspection of the photograph. "It is so long ago," murmured Lilia, with down-drooped eyes. Something she had never felt before she experienced now when Jerdrum looked admiringly at her. "And so much has happened since then," he went on. "It may be the influence of a childhood at court, but I have not been able to outgrow all loyalty to your family, princess." The words were simple, but the tone touched a chord in Lilia's faithful heart. For the moment, forgetting the part she was playing, the romantic girl put out her hand impulsively to thank him. Jerdrum took the slender little brown hand and raised it to his lips. But this mimic princess had not become accustomed to her royalty. There was something personal to her in the action, fearfully, deliciously personal. The blood suffused her dusky cheeks, and her guilty heart beat so that she hardly heard Jerdrum's words. "I have wanted to see you to tell you this," he said. "My father took me back to Denmark a few months after you left Honolulu. And then he went to Ceylon, and then to South America, and, of course, I went with him. Once when you were in London not so long ago, I was there too. I tried to see you, followed you to Scotland, but you had left the week before. I cannot tell you how it seems to me to see you again. You are part of my childhood, Princess. My father is dead, years ago. I have not a tie in the world, and the memory of that happy time in beautiful Hawaii lingers so pleasantly in my mind. Lilia did not speak. The simplest thing, to tell this man that she had been playing princess, seemed now the most impossible. So she waited, drifting helplessly with the tide his conversation took. He sat and talked as a solitary man will when he meets a sympathetic listener. He told stories of the adventurous life he had led, living over in the young girl's eager interest days of peril and nights of watchfulness. And in her presence, her sympathetic silence lent a charm of romance to that which in living had at times been merely squalid or wearisome or distasteful. But in the midst of it all, when I heard of the wrong done to you and to Hawaii, Princess— "I am not a princess," interrupted Lilia, with sudden contempt for the part she was playing. Jordrum misunderstood her, and the emotion in the sweet Hawaiian voice brought the words from him that he had not expected to say. "It is true. You are not a princess, Kaiulani. You have no realm, no royal family, no hope for the future. But you may be queen. You shall be queen, if you will only say the word. Listen, only listen patiently to me. I am not a dreamer. I know when I am promising. If you will let me work for you, the greedy Americans will never get possession of Hawaii. A throne shall be restored, and you shall grace it, Queen Kaiulani." It seemed to Lilia that all her senses were merged into one. She could only listen, her unseeing eyes bent upon his strong, long fingers, which, straying about the table, had unconsciously shaped the wool escaped from Lilia's work-basket into a semicircle. To the extreme right of this, the silver-topped inkstand had been moved. Farther to the left, an indentation was marked by a gay worsted ball. The pearl-topped slender penholder had been placed level, with the paper cutter at right angles, and behind it stood the tiny clock enameled in forget-me-nots. "When Lilia Kalani was dethroned," he was saying, "had there been but one man near her, one strong, brave man whom she trusted implicitly, the monarchy would never have been lost. If my father had been in Honolulu at that time, Lilia Kalani would be reigning there now. But this is all past. The thing is the future. You know, you must know, your advisors must realize, that if the islands are once again in the possession of the natives, all thought of annexation to the United States will be out of the question. If you will agree, Princess, if you will trust me, if you will only be your own brave self, you shall be seated on the throne, and if only for 1 hour you are recognized as Queen of Hawaii, on what pretext will a foreign power dare to interfere?" Lilia had risen. She had altogether forgotten the role she was playing. Her ardent nature was fired by Jordrum's words. She had dreamed of a restoration. She had almost quarreled with her idealized princess, whose Scotch father had threatened that he would separate her from Kaiulani if she did not learn to control the expression of her enthusiastic, uncompromising royalism. To hear her own thoughts, the dream which in her had been derided, uttered by this determined-looking young fellow, whose voice, whose manner of speech was so fervent, so belief-inspiring, transported the girl till she hardly knew what she was doing or saying. "Oh, if you can do it! If you will! My life, my fortune! Oh, what I could do to prove to you!" Jordrum caught the fluttering hands she held out to him. "I knew it! I knew it!" he exclaimed. "They told me you were cold. They hinted that you had grown politic, that you valued more the allowance doled out to you by these usurpers than you did your right to the crown. But I never believed it, never! I knew you too well, Kaiulani. The girl who read and studied and played with me. I knew that girl better than others." And then Jordrum told his plan. For years he had recognized this scheme of his for Kaiulani's succession to the Hawaiian throne only as a dream, a sort of mental puzzle, an outlet for his imagination. Now that, for the first time, he put into words the details his mind had built up day by day, he saw that what had at first merely exercised for his active brain, food for his adventurous craving for power and action, had become perfected into plausibility, even probability. Given a group of islands, isolated from the world, because of lack of cable facilities, and a small usurping oligarchy doomed to fall in time by the weight of its own jealous particles, if no great nation should intervene, and ruling by sheer exercise of military strength, an inimitable wronged native race outnumbering the white men 20-1, given a determined, courageous leadership, money, a just cause, and a legitimate sovereign, given the effective appeal to sympathy and sensibility made by a beautiful maiden queen, fair in face as her Caucasian father, Hawaiian instinct and allegiance as her brown mother, refined with European culture, forgiving, gracious, and amiable, a stranger to all the local hates and fears, biases, and revengeful desires of the petty, bitter civil war, which the old queen had seemed to embody, given that the queen's abdication in favor of her niece, an abdication of a form that could become substance only after it had been parted with, given all this, and Bertram was willing to risk his life in proving his postulates. "Here is the harbor of Honolulu," he concluded, his eye suddenly taking note of the work his hands had done unbidden. "Here is Diamond Head, where arms may be smuggled ashore. Here is your place, Princess, at Waikiki, where they shall be delivered. At this point and at this, telephone and telegraph wires shall be cut. Here is the government building, and of which 10,000 armed Hawaiians shall take possession in a night, almost without bloodshed, for the naval police are with us, the moment their queen shall call upon them. Before our enemies can communicate with any vessel in the harbor, the monarchy will be re-established, and no foreign power may interfere. Then you will make me your minister of war, perhaps, Princess, and after that, and if the Kanaka lets the independence of his country slip through his fingers, the white man is welcome to it." Letter from Princess Kaulani to a friend in San Francisco. My dear Paulia, pardon my neglect. I intended to write you months ago, but thanks to that tireless small person Lilia, we have been junketing all about the Pacific. I cannot account for Lilia's passion for going about, but since we have been at the islands, there is not a town, not a plantation, that we have not visited. We have toured the islands from Lehua to Hilo. You laugh at Lilia. She seems to be possessed with a fever for meeting and talking to every native Hawaiian on the islands. You know how prettily she speaks the language, and how winning a coax she is evidenced by the fact of my having accompanied her on most of her excursions. The result is, not what you might expect, that the people are in love with her, but that they are mad with loyalty for me. That arch-royalist Lilia infects everybody she meets, it seems to me. She never wearies of singing my praises. She goes about spending her mother's great fortune and doing good in my name, and she appears to be living in some sort of dream which I cannot understand. For of course we know, my dear, how hopeless the case is, and yet I find myself, the real sufferer, abstaining from clouding Lilia's hopes, feeling a kind of ridiculous sympathy for the mad little Jacobite who would never learn reason. All this about Lilia has a purpose. I wish she would come down and perhaps look after her a bit. She was always responsive to your control because of the passionate reverence she has for her dead mother's dearest friend. This madness may be but a fleeting emotional attack, due to the revisiting our old home, which she has not seen for years. We are to give a great ball a week from tonight. It is Lilia's birthday, and she has begged for possession of my home for one night. You should see the place. That extravagant young woman has spent 6 months' allowance in perfecting arrangements. I never dreamed how eager she is for pleasure. Everybody in town is invited, and on the lawn supper is to be served to the natives, who will come as far as Kauai. There are to be songs and dances for them, and do you think it was to be for Waikiki's birthday instead of Lilia's? Such gifts she is planning for everybody. There is something else I must tell you. I fancy I need not tell you, Paulia, that to no one else would I tell this, that Lilia has lost her heart down here in Honolulu. It may not be serious as yet, but there's a Mr. Durdrum who, oddly, I have not met, that Lilia is much interested in. They correspond, I know, and meet occasionally. There can be nothing clandestine about Lilia, and Durdrum is a gentleman, I'm sure. All my aunt's friends here are devoted to him. But Lilia is the most romantic girl I ever knew. It is such a pity that her father's sudden death provided no guardian for her. She is too young to be mistress of a fortune, and— well, come down, if you can. Kaulani. You know, or do you know, that she has sold her sugar plantation on Maui? Knowest thou, O Kanui, what things these are we carried down to Waikiki all the nights this weekend last? The old Kanaka looked a moment toward his companion in the stern of the boat. But the night was black, and the sea was black, and Hopu's face was hidden. "Knowest thou, O Kanui," the younger man began again, this time in a whisper, "that my brother Anali, the runner, sped all one night some weeks ago with a secret message, and that chiefs from all the 7 seas were gathered at Hilo when he got here?" The powerful old Kanaka leaned forward to shift the weight that lay heavy at the bottom of the long boat. "Knowest thou, O Kanui, the white giant on the schooner yonder who bade us deliver these cases at Waikiki? Knowest thou that he too was at Hilo that night with the chiefs?" Kanui bent to his oars. The necklace of ginger flowers about his massive neck rose and fell with the violence of his exertion. Hopu rowed too, his naked brown back bending over the long muffled oars. "Knowest thou, Kanui," he murmured after a short silence, "that when a chief bade Jiradruma show his authority, the white man showed before them all the royal father lay of Kaulani, and Kanui, he showed them too the writing of Lukuani, giving up the throne." Cautiously the boat drew close to shore. Hopu drew in his oars, and Kanui waded out into the water and pulled the boat in. Noiselessly the long heavy cases were carried up the slope and stored in the basement of the great pavilion. And then, when Hopu turned to walk again down to the water's edge, a silent Kanui fell upon him, gagging and binding him fast, and carefully dragging him over the pavilion's threshold. He closed the door and locked it after him. "Naught knows, Kanui," the old man muttered, shaking his head as he hurried noiselessly down to the boat. "Naught save that the tongue of Hopu wags too much." At the door of the small pavilion, Lilia, Lauzon, and Bertram stood alone, he looking down upon her with a puzzled frown. If you regret it at all, Princess," he said at last slowly, "there is yet time to go back. No one knows positively anything that could compromise you except the 12 loyal men at the house yonder, who would die rather than betray you. As to myself, I will be blamed for it all, and I can leave on the schooner before anything becomes known." The girl was so preoccupied with her own thoughts that the bitterness in his voice escaped her. There was a long silence, and then Lilia spoke. "Mr. Bertram," she said wistfully, "it has all suddenly come to seem so impossible, so fantastic. Be patient with me, and reassure me if you can, for, truly, I could die for the success of it all." "I swear we will succeed," Bertram answered. "Everything is ready. Shall I go over—" No, I know it all by heart. All day I think of it. All night I dream of it. And always I dream that we have won, and that Queen Kaiulani reigns." "If she will give the word now," Bertram answered, his old enthusiasm waking at the thrill in her low voice. "The sun will rise tomorrow on the first day of her reign." If she will give the word," Lilia repeated dreamily. "If she will. Will she? Oh, will she?" She turned from him and gazed almost prayerfully at the great flower-wreathed pagoda on the east side of the villa, where a sudden illumination of electric lights displayed the queenly, graceful figure of the princess in her white evening gown, long necklaces of deep yellow flowers about her shoulders, and on her deer-like head a coronal of the same color. A hoarse shout from hundreds of Hawaiian throats greeted her. "She is very popular," Bertram said, surprised. "Why should the people care so much for Miss Lauzon?" "Why, indeed?" repeated Lilia bitterly. "Why should anyone care for Miss Lauzon? Except me. I care, and now, before we go one step further, she must know." "Why, surely," interrupted Bertram, detaining her, "Miss Lauzon must already know. You remember that all my letters were addressed to her. All of our meetings were arranged through her. It was she who—" "Oh!" Lilia stamped her foot in a fury of hysterical impatience. "You don't understand. Will you wait for me here? I may be gone half an hour. When I come back it will be decided. Then I'll tell you." She ran swiftly toward the house, leaving Bertram looking after the small flying figure, a perplexed frown on his face. She had not seen herself this evening, he thought. What potent influence had this tall, imperious Miss Lauzon over the small princess he meant to serve? Why should she be consulted at such a time as this? Gertrude paced up and down in the darkness. To the left, the natives were dancing now and singing hulas, the very spirit of action-made music. He watched the hurrying dark figures and listened to the strong sweet voices of the Hawaiian boys, who strummed their instruments and sang, their muscular brown feet moving in sympathy with the motion of the dancers. How well they stood! What strong, fine figures they were! How well they had fought once! How well they would fight again to be released from the tyrannous oligarchy that had despoiled and enslaved them. From the house strains of civilized hulas, become waltzes and polkas, came to his ears, and between the waving palms Gertrude caught glimpses of women in evening gowns, and men in white duck as well as those in somber black. The brightly lit pagoda was filled now with a crowd of people, white, brown, and all intermediate shades, who promenaded or sat and chatted, or passed on toward the ballroom, or to the banqueting room beyond. He could not distinguish figures in that crowd, but his eyes flitted from one group to the other, searching for the two girls in whose hands, just for a moment, lay the fate of this small isolated nation in the South Seas. Gertrude stepped back into the small pavilion. He took from his pocket the list of those who had secretly bound themselves to the princess's cause. One by one he scanned them, weighing each and every possibility of failure. No, it was all complete. 12 royalists would remain after all the guests had departed. 12 men who realized that now or never must they regain their country. Before them, Kaiulani must assume sovereignty before these 12 who had sworn to die or conquer her kingdom for her. And each of these 12 could vouch for 1,000. Restlessly, Gertrude walked up and down. Now that the end had come, he felt an odd sort of regret for the companionship, more in thought than in actual presence, for Gertrude had spent little time at the capital, the companionship which too would be at an end. This enthusiastic, generous, brave little co-conspirator would never again meet him on the old footing. As he looked back now upon their exchange of opinions in a few hurried meetings, and many long letters, he said to himself that never had been a revolution planned upon such simple lines. Never had there been such exceeding faith, such open-handed generosity on one side, and such assurance of victory on the other. Up to tonight, she had been more like a boy, he said to himself, an ardent, reckless, but high-minded lad than. But just at this point in his reverie, the door opened and she stood before him. Her face was white as the gown she wore, but upon either cheek flamed a spot of red, deep as the spicy carnations which were festooned about her shoulders and in her dark hair. She came slowly forward, with her hands clasped tightly, and her soft eyes fixed upon Gertrude's face. She said piteously, "Forgive me, oh, forgive me! Think of all this means to me. Think of what I've lost tonight, and please, please don't you too punish me." "Kaulani!" exclaimed Gertrude in alarm. "What has happened? Nothing is lost." "Listen," said Lilia. "I am not the princess. I am Lilia Lauzun. I have deceived you. All this time I have deceived you. Oh, I beg you to believe that it was not my own folly that led me to do it, but my love and my loyalty to her." For a moment, Gertrude thought either he or she must be mad. His head was swimming. He looked at the pleading little figure before him, and in his place he seemed to see the proudly graceful girl who had appeared a moment in the pagoda. "You are joking," he stammered. Slowly she shook her head. "You can't be serious," he exclaimed. "What is it? Has all this strain been too much for you? You are so changed." "No, I am not mad. I wish I were," she answered. "Well," he exclaimed, "at least she knows." "Oh, yes, she knows everything now," Lilia said, bitterly sinking into a rustic chair. "She knows it all, and she says she will never forgive me." "You told her just now? Just this evening?" Lilia looked directly at him. She nodded. Gertrude stood looking down upon her. In his face amazement, inexpressible indignation, and rage were blended. For a full minute there was silence. Then Gertrude laughed shortly. "What a fool you made of me!" he exclaimed. She did not answer. She lay back in the chair, her eyes bent on the floor, her hands clasped together in quiet, desperate agony. Her silence enraged him. "Do you realize what you've done?" he demanded. what these men will think of me. These men who have put their lives into my hands and yours, and the money. How dare you? She said, lifting her eyes suddenly. The money was my own, and I sold the plantation, the house where my mother died, for this. But the princess has been in ignorance all this time. All our plans. We have used her name. What must she think? She thinks that I am all your words seem to imply. Oh well, it makes no difference now. It only seems strange that even you should. It is all over. Goodbye. You can't go like that, he said, almost roughly, intercepting her before she could reach the door. You are angry with me. But can't you see how bewildered I am? Can't you understand how strangely I find myself placed? And the princess. Oh, of course all your sympathy is for her, Lilia exclaimed, her eyes blazing now with jealous wrath. Why can't you pity me? This hurts me worse than it does her. Or you. See how little she cares. When you came that day and mistook me for her, it all came to me in a moment how I might serve her in spite of herself. I hoped that if I planned and arranged it all, if I could show her results, I could convince her that she might have the throne merely by reaching out her hand for it. It seemed providential that you supposed I was the princess, and I told you then what a silly thing I am. Remember when you asked me could we trust Lilia Lawson and send letters to her? I said to you, she's sentimental, unpractical, nonsensical, people say, but she wouldn't weigh her worthless life one moment in the balance if... She stopped and waited deliberately till she could control her voice. And I wouldn't, she went on. You believe this much, and I did throw myself heart and soul into this, and tonight when I told her, she looked at me as though she thought me mad, and she declared that I had done a base, an unwarrantable thing, and it was all for her. Oh, will you not believe it was all for her? She was sobbing now, and fell back in her chair, a prey to misery. Jotham stood looking at her, but his eyes hardly saw how young and pretty and miserable she was, as she lay with a soft, childishly rounded arm raised to cover her face. His mind was busy planning retreat, not for himself so much as for those others waiting even now for word from him. His odd blue eyes clouded with thought. His fingers strayed restlessly over the rustic table beside him, reproducing again, now that the reality no longer monopolized his mind, that crescent-shaped bay, the bold peak at its entrance, the villa far in, the street, the barracks, and the rest, all in the feathery petals of the carnations that had fallen from Lilia's throat. Oh, if she had been the princess! The regret punctuated the thread of his thought, busy now surmounting one obstacle after another. There had been something so royal in this girl, so manly, so stanch a comrade, so merrily brave, so daringly devoted, so... And all at once Jotham's eyes saw the graceful girlish figure upon which they had looked a moment too long. With one long-drawn breath of regret, he swept the map of petals from the table. After all, the thing for which he had toiled, the thing which had monopolized his thought for all these past years, was of no consequence. The vitally important thing now was that this girl should look up, should cease to sob, should smile up at him. With every second his distress grew, till his heart seemed aflame with impatient suffering. When he found himself at Lilia's side, stroking the soft brown hair, and murmuring words of consolation and endearment, he understood at length what had befallen him. There was an old Kanaka named Kanui who delivered an extraordinary message in Hawaiian to 12 suspicious Hawaiian gentlemen, standing irresolute at the gates of Kalawani's villa late one night 2 years ago, and, without waiting for an answer, ran swiftly to the water's edge, whence he rowed a man and woman up the bay to a small schooner, just ready to weigh anchor. There was another Kanaka named Hopu, who believes that he was very drunk for 2 whole weeks, during which time he imagined that he rowed back and forth every night, and all night from Diamond Head to Kalawani's villa. There are 6 of these same Hawaiian gentlemen who do not believe in praying to death, as did their mothers and fathers. They wish they did, though, for then they might effectively punish a Dane, who they include in their list of unforgivable foreigners, although they admit that Jotham's father was not a missionary. There are 6 other Hawaiian gentlemen who believe that a dangerous lunatic named Jotham is permitted to live quite at large in San Francisco. There is still a mystery in Hawaiian commercial circles as to the origin of Bamberger's fortune, that Bamberger who sold arms and ammunition, which no one dreamed he possessed, to the Filipinos. Conway, though, could tell where he got them. End of section 1.